Okay, no doubt the batteries will run out. Okay, yeah.
Hello and welcome. My name is Sri Krishna and I'm with the Bangalore Literature Festival. On behalf of the Bangalore International Center and the Lit Festival, of course, a very warm welcome to WorldLit. For those of you joining us for the first time, WorldLit is the Bangalore Literature Festival's digital literary platform, bringing to you live stream sessions, video interviews, and podcasts with leading international and Indian authors. We are delighted to be partnering with the Bangalore International Center for this. Over the past 2 years, we've had some very interesting conversations on the platform with the likes of Pico Iyer, Anthony Horowitz, Peter James, and others. And we continue to be excited about how the platform is evolving, and we hope to feature many more authors in the days to come. Today, we are delighted to bring to you a writer's tale after the book launch and awards with James Kelman and Anita Nair. Booker Prize winner James Kelman is also known as the greatest British novelist of our times and someone who's created his own brand of humor. He'll be in conversation with our city's very own Anita Nair, Sahitya Academy Award winner, and the founder of the creative writing mentorship program, Anita's Attic. Welcome, James. Welcome, Anita. With that, Anita, I'll request you to take this forward.
Okay, it's good to be here.
Good evening, Mr. Kelman.
Good evening, James.
Well, I know it's middle of the day there, but for our Indian viewers, it is evening. It's almost 6:45 now. So I'd like to start off by telling you how much I enjoyed reading God's Teeth and Other Phenomena. When I started reading it, there was a point, every point I would stop and say, but oh my God, I know this feeling. I know this, especially because this is a writer's story more than anything else. And there's so many times the bells were ringing in my head saying, oh my God, I've gone through this so many times. And this sense of deja vu that keeps popping up every now and then. And so it was such an interesting read for me because it was also validating in many ways for me about all the various emotions I felt having to be this, writer performer more than anything else. And I'd like to start off by asking you my first question, which is that, even before you start reading the book, God's Teeth and Other Phenomena, the first thing that gets you is God's teeth. What on earth is God's teeth? And what does it refer to?
God's teeth is it's something used by the central character. It's not an expression of my own. It's almost the way he has of not saying anything really horrible. It's something he would say in company because he would assume that it will not get him into trouble, that it's a sort of almost a neutral term. And that's really why it's used. The title of it is used by the character, but using it for the title itself was, in fact, it was a suggestion by an editor of mine she's also a writer. And my earlier title was not so kind of striking, and I liked her suggestion. I wanted to introduce the second part of it and other phenomena to kind of it's almost to defuse it and also indicate maybe the author's own particular philosophical view, not so much perhaps non-theological. To try and get neither to say that somehow this fellow is an atheist, because it's not to say something like that, and nor is it to try and indicate a fundamentalist position or something that is much older in time about not only the existence of God as a supernatural entity, but one who has physical kind of traits or attributes, who might also bite. So it seemed to me to be a good title, I suppose, to say that.
It had so much of an influence on me that this morning I was talking to somebody, and instead of saying, he's acting like he's the cat's whiskers, I said he was acting like the god's whiskers. And then it just hit me that this is where it came from. So one of the most interesting things about this book, and especially for an Indian writer like me writing in English, is the language itself. For Indians writing in English, it's pretty much like a steeplechase. There is the mother tongue influence, the regional idiom, Indian words and expressions, all of which need to be amalgamated into the standard English, which is, the Queen's English, or in India, we consider it to be the gold standard and so on. So what was very interesting for me is how you worked in the language of Glasgow. And would you talk a bit about it and also the challenges and what it's been like?
It's the difficulty here is that my answer may go on and on and on. So if I'm going on too long, just raise your hand to interrupt me. The thing of it is really that this has been a struggle of mine ever since I began writing as a young writer, was to find a way into the voice and quotes of my own culture. You can imagine in the sense of it could be someone from within India, but it could also be somebody within Africa or with any of the former colonies or the colonized section of a British Empire. So in a sense, it's trying to make use of the colonizers' imposed language and try to, if you can find your own rhythms, even using the colonizers' language, you can try and, by shifting syntax and grammar and so on, you can maybe try and find some kind of sense of the verbal or the rhythmic nature of your own former or your languages that are often proscribed. I mean, my grandmother's language was Scottish Gaelic, but that was outlawed. It was prescribed for a time by the British Empire. So there are certain phrases and phrasing used within that language that I would try and make use of within my within English, or my use of standard English. We are in the same position as you will find in India, in every part of India, but not only India. You will find in the entire that subcontinent, including and also places like Pakistan and Bangladesh, and also South Africa. Every place where the empire, English Empire was, you will find that the standard form is thrust down your throat as a young person. You're brought up to speak standard English, and only in this way will you achieve a better place in society. And what I found was that anyone who uses language in the way I do is always in dialogue. You're always on the margins. You never occupy the third-party narrative. You might say third-party narrative of the standard English literary form. Sometimes when you're doing English literature at university, you call it the God voice. It's the unimpeachable voice of the standard, basically of the imperialist, the English imperialist. So in a sense, I've kind of all of my life as a writer has been spent trying to use the linguistic forms from within my own culture. It's almost as a way of it's asserting the uniqueness of the individual, but also the uniqueness of your own culture. And it's not to say that your culture is superior to any other, but it is your culture, and you demand the right to create art as a member of your own culture. You should never have to use someone else's language in order to express one's own self as a writer. So it becomes a very complex struggle and then and enters into areas to do with what you might call language and value, or fact and value. What is a value? If you use the standard third-party voice, whether you're a writer in India, in Africa, in USA, any place where English is the voice of authority.
You know,
How many?
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think there's a bit of, the time lag, and I thought you'd stop. Sorry for interrupting you. Apologize.
No, not at all.
So I was wondering, maybe you could read a bit, because then we, like for the viewers who've not, who don't know how you write, this might be a great point for them to hear the language the way you use it.
Yeah. Okay, I shall. I'll read a section from the novel,
Right.
and I'm not quite sure how long it goes on for. Again, if it goes
You could read for about 4 or 5 minutes, if that's up to you.
Well, I may go longer.
You need longer? Okay, sure. Okay.
Now, this is a section. This section is where the writer goes to an art college. This is where he's speaking, and it's for a seminar with 24 students aged between 17 and 25. Did they all want to be artists? That would be wonderful. Imagine all the young folk of the world. We all want to be artists. No wonder. The lives of the artists, the loves of the artists, that is what excites us all. And there they all were looking at me, freshly scrubbed faces, including 3 teachers who were sitting in the front row, arms folded, smiles fixed at the ready. Every time I raised an eyebrow, they took mental notes. The students were gaping at me the way students gape, even when they're dozing. It signifies nothing at all other than that a teacher holds the floor and they are to shut up. I called to the students, what is the square root of energy? The very stuff of madness. That's something to gape about. You're all gaping at me. It's an existential nightmare. Did you ever read old Sartre? People don't like Sartre. Why not? He's political. Not only political, and intellectual. The French tradition is different to ours. You'll know that by now. You're looking at painters, art students. You go where you like. You enmesh yourself. What a word, enmesh. Is it a word? Maybe I've made it up. That's what I like about art. You make things up. You go with where it takes you. You stay with it and you stay true. Somebody cleared a throat. Probably the head teacher. The students were looking at me. Were they embarrassed? I grinned. What I like about artists is that they stay true. Think about old Zola and the Dreyfus affair, his relationship with Cézanne as a boy. Think of Van Gogh as an evangelist, or Mrs. Pizarro's pots of soup, so the young artists might survive. Art is what I do. I take from here and there and everywhere, and I just try to get by. I'm telling you about me because I'm here for one day, artist to artist. Most of the problems I face as a young writer are variations of the ones faced by all artists. I realized that early, so I just saw myself as one, as an artist, not a writer. It made sense and it saved time. And that is all we want, to save time, to get the work done. Who cares what you think of me? Just do it in your own time. You're all the same. You are young artists trying to make a go of it. Any questions? A male student held up his hand. How did you begin? In freedom. I pointed my right index finger straight at him, and then at the table in front of where I was sitting. Right here, I said, with the pen and paper, with the keyboard, the screen, stories, poems, screenplays, scripts, song lyrics, just begin. Get it down and move, make, shape. It becomes something. Forget inspiration. That is shite. Forget it. The word shite caused a breach in the atmosphere, the intake of many breaths. That was the teachers. God's teeth, I said. I glanced at them. Artists fight to regain freedom through the base material, which in my case is language. You begin in freedom, then discover the constraints, all the taboos, society, and how repressive it is, class, hierarchy, social, cultural, the suppression of indigenous cultures, immigrant cultures, inferiorization, racism, elitism, and downright snobbery. The value we place in our own family. No inspiration. Plunge in at the deep end. Get your words down and go. Build sentences. Going with the rhythm from within. Artist as maker. Building out the way. Forget the shit handed down via the conventional education process. Art critics don't explain how art is made. They say what it is, but they cannot say how it arrives. A teacher was looking at her watch. What time is that? I said. Apologies, am I blathering? I get carried away. What about, says you? Everything. Space and time and the idea of it, sharing, being with students and artists. Art students, man, I love that. When I was your age, even if you felt like fuck your best friends, it was so exciting. Painting whatever you like. Nudes, and nudes, whatever you wanted, and then Delacroix, because that's where it takes you. That's where it took me. Breasts in freedom, torn blouses. Who cares, man? It's just so exciting. What writers do gets distorted because everybody uses language in one way or another, in one form or another. Anyone not illiterate can write. Think of what we do in the same way as other artists, whether musicians, painters, sculptors. How does that affect our basic approach? How do we go ahead? I stopped. A student was jumping about in his seat in a sort of paroxysm. He calmed himself. I looked at my watch for a moment. He was staring at the ceiling, at the floor. He was finding it so difficult. It was difficult. It was invasive, what I was saying. It was so damn excruciating. And he had no cotton wool to stuff in his ears. Some things are too personal. What things? What I was saying, too personal. I'd forgotten. Art students and art. Was his behaviours disturbing? I don't know. It disturbed me, but only literally. I did not want him to leave the room. Just sit still. Calm down, reminding me of my youngest child. Painters don't sit in a corner, I said. They don't think through a bunch of ideas for possible pictures. They pick up a brush, they pick up a pen, a crayon, they start drawing. Musicians don't walk around thinking. They don't sit on a chair dreaming up ideas. They go to the keyboard, they pick up a guitar, a flute, a fiddle. They start tinkering, humming tunes, playing the instrument, a kind of doodling, like painters. Writers work in similar ways. They play themselves into something. Stop waiting for it to happen. It happens because you make it happen. The rain is raining. Nay in between. What is it? It is energy. Fucking energy. What is the square root of energy? I know I said that before, but I'm saying it again. A teacher stood up and glanced at. I glanced at my wristwatch. God's teeth, the interval. Sorry, I said it's the interval, and I escaped. Okay. How about that?
Right, thank you. In fact, I have my next question based exactly from this section. I had written it down, where he says, art critics don't explain how art is made. They say what it is, but not how it arrives. Now, Jack Proctor speaks this, of course, to the group of art students. How does James Kelman arrive at his art? The writing process, I mean.
Really, it was the kind of stories I wanted to write. I could go back to your first question, Anita. It's to do with, put it this way, I did not want to write stories about the Queen of England's grandfather. I wanted to write stories about my own grandfather. I wanted to write stories about my grandmother, my family, my community. I wanted to write about people from within my own community. And in order to do that, I had to weld the language and shape the language so that my own people could breathe within the language. That's where the stories came from. When I was a young fellow in my teens, I assumed I was going to be a painter. I kind of liked that when I was a young guy, but I assumed I would be a painter. It was only when I got to about the age of 19, I realised that I never ever painted. And although I was still interested in the painters and the visual arts, I had become more interested in the writing. I read many biographies of artists. I loved the lives of artists. I loved the political commitment and the kind of the life commitment in a sense. You could say what I liked about Zola and Van Gogh, as I mentioned, would be because Zola would have fought to the death for the rights of the Jewish army man Dreyfus, who was being utterly treated so badly and hounded by the French state. So Zola would put his whole life and career on the line for him. And you had someone like Van Gogh who would, because of his own needs, he would go away and kind of try and bring a form of Christianity to miners. You might say, well, why didn't he help them organise for better conditions in their place of employment? But at the same time, the important thing was a commitment. So in a sense, what you get, or what I look for, and the artists that I came to admire and respect were always artists who were committed, fully committed, and the same carries forward to writers. So for me, the writers are writers who commit fully. And that happens within the writers, Indian writers. You get, I mean, some of the great writers at the time of partition, it reminds me of the great kind of Russian writers. You talk about someone like Bashir or Munto. You're talking about Isaac Babel or some of the great Russians. There is that sense of it's almost a desperation. Sometimes commitment's like a desperation because of or their fullness in terms of injustice. You might say, and which includes things like frustrations and recognizing injustice and not being able to contribute apart from something from within yourself, in a sense, in a way that to me becomes that's where great art takes off, almost, from that. So it's not that one begins because I'm going to be a great artist. It's not to do with that. It's to do with always going more deeply into your own work, really, and finding ways always to go more deeply. And usually that's what extends your kind of technical ability,
Yeah.
the kind of things that critics are more comfortable in dealing with.
So one of the things that I have, done a lot is, especially when you're writing and this is all you're doing, is that there are times when you think that, I mean, how do you get past this? Because there's so many interruptions and all kinds of irritants popping up. And then in your book, I have this scene where the writer is a family man, and the scene where Jack Proctor has to contend with his young children bursting into his room, offering a biscuit, tea, and whatever, and then everything is an interruption, everything is an irritant. And on one part of me was flinching because, I was thinking this is exactly how I feel when my family would come in and ask me. When my son was a young boy, he would come up and stand there and say, "What is more important, the book or me?" And then I just look at him and say the book. And then I, feel like this meanest mom in the world. And so this is a book which I think will have any writer thinking at every few pages. I know this. I know exactly how this feels. Whether it's, when you walk into when Jack Proctor walks into the bar and he has this banker price book kind of thing, and that becomes your identity after a while, for a writer. So, so does that happen to you where you find that despite, your book happened in 94 and thereafter so many years have passed, but do you still find yourself being alluded to as, the writer of that book?
The thing is that my first collection of short stories was published in 1973. It was finished when I was 25 years of age, and it was published in USA, although I lived in Scotland. I had two young children at that time. My kids were born in 1970 and 71, my two daughters. So when I was bringing that first collection of short stories together, sometimes my wife worked and sometimes I worked. Usually she worked and looked after the children. But there were times when I had to fulfill the role of parent who was there, and so I was very much used to kids coming in and bringing me a glass of milk or singing, whatever it was, So, and the kids get used to me being very bad-tempered and grumpy and so on, and I get used to things at that time, working on typewriter or with pen. I would get used to knocking over cups of coffee and so on. I would get used to so many interruptions. This current novel, God's Teeth, it begins from an interruption. The character, the guy, Jack Proctor, is attempting to write. He's trying to finish a sentence when his wife opens the door and comes in, and so he's in mid-sentence, and he tries to kind of hold that sentence together, but then gives up. And he makes quite a telling. I think this is what you learn as when you're someone who is used to interruptions. Eventually he relaxes because he knows, forget it, it will come back in one form or another. He will find some way within the work of resolving what was lost in the interruption. And I think when you consider what goes on, when you think about that, it takes you into the nature of improvisation. And it takes you into the nature of also, I think, what art can be, which is, you could say, any great work of art is the fulfillment of the artist who creates it at that particular moment in time. The day after the novel's finished, it is new and it's outside of the artist has got to the pinnacle of his or her own being for that one moment to finish that work of art. That's kind of the way I look at it. So every interruption is incorporated. Every interruption is like, you have to say thank you for an interruption, because as the artist, it takes you to another, somewhere else. It has a potential for leading into something powerful. So I try and look at interruptions as something to cherish.
So of course there is this whole part of of Jack Proctor having to go to these writing workshops and public performance like things and so on. And I kept thinking that he hates it. He hates having to do it at many levels because he'd rather be in his cottage chalet by the canal,
Yeah.
communing with the ducks and writing his short stories and all of that. And I like I said earlier, every time Jack Proctor would go off into that kind of a spiral, I'd think, oh, this is me, this is exactly me. And then this part of me would come up, and yes, Jack Proctor says he does it because he's already received a certain sum of money, and so he's obliged to do it. Nevertheless, a lot of us, writers, we end up turning into performers, and there is that line where Jack Proctor says this was a performance, and, to the Arts Council lady. And so I keep wondering what drives, drives us writers into accepting writing retreats and being part of public programs, etc. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there are. I mean, the most basic thing is economic. You usually when at some point as a writer, you really are. It's not that you write to earn money, but you do need money to survive. You want to create your work and do your work, but in order to do it, you cannot. You don't want to rely on your partner to give you the food or to pay your rent. You want to be able to do these things yourself, and you are occasionally offered ways of earning money, and that may be, generally speaking, for myself, it was always to do tutoring, taking a creative writing workshop, and you receive a small fee. But sometimes these fees are you don't have anything else as a writer. There are no big advances when you're a young writer, and the same applies to old writers. My advance nowadays is less than it was when I was maybe 30. That's just the way it is. I mean, my readership are all dropping dead. So, so the economic, you can never ever rule out the economic. The economic is crucial. That, and there's also that sense in which many artists who are, say, they come from bourgeoisie, maybe, who don't have to earn money, or maybe one novel earns a fortune. It's almost as though it entitles them to be an adolescent for the rest of their life. So they're allowed to be kind of mad and go and get drunk or take dope, or they're allowed not to do their work in some way. So it's like being an eternal teenager or something, that gives them the right, and they fly around and looking to kind of spend most of their time being cool, really, I suppose, or think that that's what's intended. And unfortunately, most people who think about writers tend to think in these terms, and that includes art critics. So generally speaking, what they do is describe what an artist has created, but they can't speak about the process of creation. And the one thing an artist can do is speak about the process of creation. But what you discover is that when you do that, it's the last thing that's wanted. No one wants to hear about it. For ordinary students, whether in communities or whether schools or universities, anyone, ordinary students, it can be far too close to them. The student I spoke about in the section that I read, what the Jack Proctor's saying, as often happens, not often, but occasionally happens, you find a student or someone is so affected by what you're saying as an artist in that tutoring situation, that they kind of flee, they cannot cope with it, and they want to escape what you're saying. It's too close to them. You know from that person is really kind of has gone completely where you are, and may be capable of great art themselves, or it doesn't matter, or creating art or doesn't matter, but you've hit a nerve that's too raw for them. And most academics don't want to go to that place where the raw nerves are, where true commitment is. Otherwise, they'll end up being ostracized like a great academic. Academics like, well, for instance, Chomsky or someone, the great artists who are philosophers or writers who come out and make statements and are not scared, or rather, they may be scared, but it doesn't stop them making political statements. They will not take the easy way out. They don't find it possible to do that. Maybe they would prefer to, but it's not possible for them.
Mm.
So, and of course, ultimately, authority will try and control them in whatever way they can. Excuse me, whether by marginalisation, whether by exile, or if you live in certain states, they will kill them. Which is why writers are often killed.
I think we have time for one more question. And there is a point where Jack Proctor tries to distinguish between literary art that is far removed from the detective cops and killers shite.
Yes.
Is that how you say it? Because,
Yeah.
right. So,
Shite is very.
sorry.
Well, shite is good. Whereas,
This must be a first where.
Anita, I'll give you a shorthand. Shit,
Yeah.
shit
So
is
what does
cool
James
American.
Kelman
Shit
think
cool.
is literary
Shite
art?
is not cool. Simply because any art that is worthwhile is always in a position antagonistic to authority. Always. And generally speaking, that puts them in an antagonistic position with the state, with what exists. And the problem with most, and you will know because you've gone your own way yourself, and many writers are sort of worry their way between genre fiction and what they would regard perhaps as their strongest fiction, which may not be genre at all. In fact, generally speaking, isn't. But you're always walking that line. You come from literary fiction into genre fiction. You always walk the line between. It's almost a requirement of genre fiction that you have to accept, to some extent, an authority that exists prior to yourself. Some kind of. It's almost like an anti-existential or something. You have to. So generally speaking, you can see what the stereotypes come out of it. Generally speaking, in genre fiction, the central character, male or female, is enduring a kind of some sort of. They're often what could you say, sore thumbs, or they're the square peg in a round hole. They're having issues. There's always something, or they have trouble with their superiors, or they don't get promoted, or whatever it is. That's usually what it usually amounts to. Someone who's in a disgruntled position, but generally speaking, their career has been put on hold, or who knows what it is. But that's the kind of position that most creators of genre fiction are pushed into. Whereas in literary fiction, it's like you can do something, whatever you want to do, in a sense. You're going to a depth that you perhaps don't have to do in genre fiction. I don't know. I have tried. It hasn't worked out for myself too well. Genre fiction. Usually, there's a point in it. I usually end up kind of laughing at myself or something, which is not pleasant laughter. It's not even sarcasm. It's worse than that. It's like a devilish roar, that will probably drive me to the pub.
With this, I think we should, I think there are a few questions.
As a writer, was writing this book about writer easy, or was it challenging is a question. Did the Booker win change your writing experience? And what was the immediate impact like?
The Booker Prize for me is not something that can be generalized from. I received quite a tremendous hostility because of the way I was using language. And the hostility was kind of overwhelming at times. But it wasn't just it wasn't simply psychological. You have to remember that when I was awarded the Booker Prize, there was such an outcry. The chief executive of the biggest bookshop line in the UK refused to sell the book. Now, they would not take the book into the bookshops. That was the bookshop in that time that was second only to Waterson's or Barnes Noble. So they had bookshops all over the UK and Ireland, and they refused to take the books. So, unfortunately, that kind of that to some extent that's never been resolved really. And since the Booker Prize award, you could say that there's been a narrowing of the arteries of book sales, you know. So it was not really a great experience for me. I quite enjoyed being able to annoy and antagonize so many people within the establishment. That gave me a great sense of pleasure. And I was learning to deal with that, though. You have to learn to deal with it, because you work out. You have to try and work out, why do they hate my work? What is it they hate, really? Why would they find? Why does it create hostility? And the interesting thing there takes you back to a question posed by Anita earlier on. Really, it takes you into the sense that when you're working from a community that is marginalised by state authority, what you're doing in that is you're actually asserting the right of your own community to exist. I will not be as presumptuous as to go into the situation in India, but the kind of, what I will say is the kind of hierarchical setup in India is as it is. The hierarchy, there is hierarchy in the UK, and some of the communities that are at the lower end of that, they're basically kept in silence. They can exist as long as they don't assert their existence and don't have the cheek to create art from within it. So you'll find it in Indian society, if you're at the lower levels, if you're at the lowest, if you're from the Dalit community, you may, there are occasionally, you may get writers coming from, I mean, think of Narayan, or you will get perhaps writers coming from the lowest communities. Each time you do something as an artist from the lowest communities, you're asserting the right of your community not only to exist, but to create art. And it's the creation of art that is the essence of humanity. And what any hierarchy wants to do is to find a way of saying those at the lowest end of our society are not real human beings. So that for me was at the heart of the hostility I received from the upper middle class English establishment at that time. That is what it is. So that's a kind of long answer to the question about the Booker Prize. When you talk about things like the Booker Prize, you have to try and make a division between the people who award the prize and the people who receive the prize. There was a smashing New Zealand writer won the award about 30 years ago. A woman, a great woman. She died a couple of years ago. Her name escapes me now. What's her name? She's a great writer. And she was treated with exactly the same, treated with contempt like my own work was. I was actually described as an illiterate at one point, an illiterate who had written like 3 novels and many collections of short stories. So these are the kinds of things that happen. It's very important to be aware of that. Look to reality rather than to what maybe the value put on it by the establishment.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. The next question is by M.W. Berwick, and they'll ask it themselves. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks, Lekka. Hi, Anita. Can you hear me okay? Hi, and hi, Jim. Martin Buick here. So I wrote my PhD on your earlier work back around the end of the 90s and early 2000s. So I was just wondering about the Kelman Library, that the novel is put under that kind of banner, and just to work out what's the aim of the Kelman Library. You're just trying to bring all the different strands of writing and investigation across different forms together to form a kind of a body of work of inquisition sort of thing.
Well, you know, that no, I'm not really trying to do that. The thing is that I've tried to kind of bring together all my work that's available and the work that I've been working on for many years. What I found was there never was in a sense, a publishing audience for it that I found in the UK. So now I'm basically published in USA, but with a radical independent publisher, simply because my work has been marginalised too much in the UK, and there's really no interest in. I mean, the book that I brought out 6 months ago with Noam Chomsky, there hasn't been one single review of that novel, that collection of correspondence and essays, and there's not one single review. I'm not really expecting much of this novel in the UK either. It's just it won't happen. So the work that's coming out, the next book that comes out is again expressly political. It's about different aspects of racism and so on, and of the far right in the UK and also in Turkey. So that the next book, that book would not have been. I mean, there's no publisher really. Maybe a couple of small left-wing publishers in the UK would have been interested. I don't know. No one was interested in bringing out the essays. No one was interested in bringing out the books of interviews, like 50 years of interviews. No, none was interested in other potential books dealing with areas of different experience of a writer. I mean, they write short stories, and you know, I was very fond of the very short form in prose fiction. You know, you don't get it so much in standard English, the literary tradition, but you do get it in other cultures. You know, like maybe only 200 or 300 pages long. So I'm bringing out a collection of those stories and different things. But so the radical press in the US, they're very keen to. They see this all and want to publish my work as a whole. You know, so and bring out some of the work that has been out of print for quite a few years. You know, that was never really sold. But as I say, I don't really blame a lot of the UK publishers. I think it was very hard to place my work because of what happened to the Booker Prize. And remember that a couple of years earlier, I was in the shortlist for the Booker Prize. But you might say that, I mean, one of the people on the shortlist when I won the Booker Prize was has just been awarded a Nobel Prize. And the person who was in the shortlist in 1989 when it was shortlisted, he's also won the book of the Nobel Prize. My work is not actually available in bookshops, Martin. You can't. I feel sorry for the people who try and sell the books. Like the salesperson, they walk in with this catalogue, and the booksellers are going, "There's the door, cheerio. That guy's illiterate. But I've got his books. How can he be illiterate if he has books to sell?" You end up in that kind of thing. That for the writer, you go, "Look, I don't want to be involved in these struggles. I would rather go to a publisher who doesn't give you a row because they can't place your books."
So if you start in freedom, does that mean you end up finding it again, or you find ways to rediscover some of that freedom again?
Yeah, but it is, in a sense, as a young writer, a young artist of any description, no matter whether it's the visual arts or music or sculpture, every young artist wants to do their best. That is so much so, it's an assumption you don't know, it's a totally unchallenged. You want to do your best. If you come from certain cultures, you find that doing your best gets you into trouble. I mean, one of the things about here in India, which I think is strong to see, is to see it's so much of the contemporary literature written by women. I mean, I think some of the stuff, seeing some, Anita Nair, who's interviewing me just now, Anita said, "Oh, she's there, so I'm seeing her face just now." But I think about trying to some of the voices in the where about the ladies compartment, the ladies section of the train,
ladies coupe,
where different women coming together who are actually giving it's like each one is an I voice story in that sense contained within. It's very difficult to do in prose fiction. It's difficult to do that, but some of the terrain or some of the stories and some of the content of the stories that's going on there, I find that's as powerful as you can get. And it is some of what's going on just now, I find in stories by women in India is really powerful. And what you're seeing also is a backdrop. I got that looking again at a story by, I won't name other names, but what you're getting is a sense of the other aspects of the community. So we're not only involved in bourgeoisie. What we get is this sense of, there's a servant there. This woman's daughter is forced to become a prostitute. The mother is forced to prostitute her. Here's a society that is based so much on the idea of male as breadwinner for all the family. The nuclear family is not really a nuclear family, except in the sense the right wing has transformed the family into a kind of autonomous community. And there is the breadwinner of the community. And women have that sort of pressure. I would say, I was going to refer to Anita, to an earlier question, Anita, talking about values and so on. The women's tradition also in the English language tradition outside of India and the UK, for example, if you go to especially USA, if we look at some of the women there, they've forged a path. People like Gertrude Stein and Catherine Porter, Tilly Olsen, they've forged a path. They've challenged male value, as is happening from female writers in India and elsewhere. Also in Africa, women are having to take on that same struggle that I've been speaking about. They've had to redefine what values. What do we mean by the word beauty? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by saying that human being was tall? What does tall mean if you're a woman? What all of these things that, you know, if you have the God voice, I would make the third party narrative voice. If you used an expression such as the beautiful woman entered the room, you go, excuse me? I accept that from a first person, the I voice. Don't give me that as a third person, as though this is an unimpeachable fact of existence, that this is how we define beauty. You know, so these kind of things where we talk about language and value, the value, you know. So these are the questions that I think that in that sense that males in a sense have to find ways of challenging value in the way that, generally speaking, the women are always bump their head against it. You bump your head against that. You just want to write a story and you bump your head against male value, you know. And the same that would happen also about certain, in my own culture, talking about that side, whether it be working class experience, whether it's coming from a Celtic experience. My argument with some writers are how they can be racist when it comes to the Celtic community. That's why I find that difficult. Irish and Scottish, or you know, or whatever. So, but these things that you have to, as a male writer, as well confront. You confront your own the way that your culture is being prescribed. You have to take it on as a young writer, or you don't. But if you don't, then you're not doing it. You know. So, anyway,
I think there are a couple of more questions. Leka?
Yes, David Aitken.
Yes, you hear me?
yes.
Hi, James. Yeah, quick question. I just wondered, do you think the Scottish literary scene of today are you encouraged by it? Is it a much improved kind of literary landscape since your day, particularly in terms of what you referenced there as well, with the number of women writers in Scotland who are currently in print? You know, if you were to compare that to when you first started out.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think one of the mistakes to make is to believe that society must move forward. And what I have seen, in keeping with what's going on, I would say in terms of global politics, there's been an extraordinary reaction within the last 50 years. And this is also the case in literature. So I don't think just now literature in Scotland or anywhere else in the UK really is keeping up with what has gone on before. I find just now that the reaction, and there's no reason why the reaction in political reaction in society and so on, why there's no reason why you should think that literature is any different from that. Literature is not going to march ahead in freedom when so many other people have been put under the yoke. If we think of the destruction of citizens' rights and civil rights and so on, if we think about the way that these general rights have been curtailed since the UK's exit from Europe, we're now taking the US as a model. And I'm afraid also, Anita, it seems to me too that the bourgeoisie, or you might go people in India too, they look to it's as if they fall for certain aspects of I would say kind of what's going on in US, the sort of the believing what's been put out. I mean I find it's a very, very difficult time, whether we're moving towards aspects of fascism, whether it's in India, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the USA, whether it's in Africa. The things that we are accepting just now would have been unthinkable to accept 30 years ago. I would say unthinkable. The way that you go to the UK, how they've destroyed the National Health Service, Now, these things that we used to take for granted in Western society, and the way that has never been the case in the US. It's never really been the case. I don't think you can expect writers to be outside of their society. They don't move forward as though you move forward formally, and somehow you can make the formal thing somehow be not dependent or not really involved with society as it exists. That's not the case. A writer who is a fascist is a fascist. I mean, what we're seeing in these countries, what we see in countries, and that could look what's happened to the young writer in New Zealand. There's a young woman who won the Booker Prize in New Zealand. She's come out only to state some questions or make statements honestly. That's all she's done, and she's been attacked by the New Zealand state. If we look at what's been going on in Australia, how are writers to survive properly so we can easily, these happen to have in common what? They're in a kind of, I don't want to say post-colonial, it's wrong to say post-colonial, they are still suffering that yoke. They still suffer from the sorts of institutions that were put in place, whether it's 1947 in the subcontinent, whether it's 1949 in China. There are these things that people are still suffering under. We're only talking about people's grandparents here, but we're still talking about things that were institutionalized. So I certainly cannot, there is no special place for Scotland or in any of that, you know. So anyway. So is there another question?
Our last question for today is from Philip McLaren.
Hi, Philip.
Hi there, James. How are you?
Yeah, doing fine. Getting hot under the collar because I'm considering the yoke of British imperialism.
I heard that yoke. I feel that yoke. It's no yoke. It's more of a raised guillotine, I think. James, you and I have spoken about my writing taking on an Australian vernacular before today. And my position with that is that I'm concerned about communicating with my readers. If I push our vernacular too far, people in Scotland won't be able to read my work. And also, I'm amazed that I'm published at all, by the way. And I'm looking at transparency in language rather than padding my work. Are you aware of overworking as you write?
Yes, but you know, I think it's important to say that's the way I began writing. I began, you know, and so it means that again, I'd answered Anita earlier in this context that it's not a kind of acquisition, or it did not become a formal interest in 1994 when I published the novel that won the Booker Prize. That was my interest back in 1969 when I began writing. And it's also, you have to remember too, that my work was first banned in 1972 when my first story was, the printer refused to print it and said it was the language of the gutter and it was blasphemous. Now, I was only like, what age was I in 1972? I was 24, 25 or something like that. So you think, guys, I've just done my best here. And it's banned, right? So yeah, in a sense, it forces you. What happens when you writing gets attacked? You're forced to reflect on it, and from that position, you can never not be immersed in it. So formally, the last like 50 years for myself, more than 50 years now, has been a case of going more deeply all the time. So these formal matters that you raise, Philip, as a writer, I would not expect a writer in the position that you may find yourself in, or writers who are coming to that kind of reflection on what it is you do to a later period in your writing. I would never kind of say, oh, you should go, you dive right in here. It's not. I don't really see that as possible. And another very important point too, the way I do it is not a prerequisite for great art. Do you know what I mean? One of the important things I used to and still do draw attention to from any tutoring any group or speaking to any younger writer or artist, when you begin, that very first story that you create could be a great piece of art. No matter whether it's great or indifferent, it stands as a piece of art. Yeah. It's not an exercise or a working towards. It's a piece of art. Right from when you begin, when you're as naive or innocent, it doesn't matter. So there is no, you could go to, say, a great writer like Tolstoy, and you think, goodness me, that bugger wrote Resurrection when he was hitting 70. Jesus, he might have been older than 70. I will never do that. But you look at what Tolstoy was doing in his first collections of stories when he was with the Cossacks or whatever. You look at these stories he was writing when he was 22, 23. I mean, they were just wonderful stories, but that formal thing I'm talking about was not there. But there was no need for it to be. In a sense, I think your work's as honest as you want to make it. But one thing I would say, in mitigation, Your Honour, remember your job. Your job is not to go out and get readers. That's your publisher and distributor's job. Your job is to make that story as best you can fucking make it. That to me, and so to that extent, as writer artist, you must rely on your own kind of, you must trust yourself in that sense. You must have that faith in yourself. Okay, I'm going to do this, and you as publisher or editor, you must come with me on this. You at least must recognize that I'm doing the best I can do in my work. So, if that's any kind of answer.
That was our last question for today.
Thank you, Mr. Kelman. Such an honor and pleasure talking to you. And I'm going to try and read everything else that you've written. Because I hugely enjoyed God's Teeth and Other Phenomena. So thank you again.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It's been great to be part of the Bangalore Festival. It's been great. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Kelman. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
And thanks also to my granddaughter for making it possible.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, only technology.
Good night, everyone here, and good evening to you, Mr. Kelman. Have a great day, and to you, Anita. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.